Welcome to the annotation of Emigrée by Carol Rumans for GCSE Poetry and Conflict Anthology. So for your first annotations, anything in green is contextual, and anything purple is structural, and then anything pink is language. So an emigrant is a person who left their birthplace to settle in another country for whatever reason, and that obviously forms the basis of this poem. However, emigrée is a feminine form of the word, so we can assume that this is a female narrator. The Emigrée is part of a poetry collection called Thinking of Skins, and it was published in 1993 during the conflict in the former Yugoslavia. So there are some links throughout the poem that are reminiscent of the conflict in Yugoslavia, but it's important to note that this poem is timeless and locationless. There is no regular rhyme scheme or rhythm, which suggests the unpredictable nature of war zones, and the narrator tries to impose order by using regular stanza lengths. So we've got the unpredictable nature of war, and then the narrator trying to reassert control through the way that she structures her stanzas. So in the first stanza, there was once a country starts almost like a fairy tale, and that kind of pulls from the genre of fairy tales, like Once Upon a Time or In a Land Far Away. So it's a very whimsical tone. And as I said previously, the country is unnamed, so this could be universal. So it could be for anybody who's ever had to leave the country that they were born in. She left it as a child, which could be suggestive of a lack of control, which might explain the way she feels about her home country later in the poem and the way that she describes it. Similarly, the idea of a child having to leave emphasises the innocence and the destruction caused by war, that innocent children have to leave their homes. She describes her memory of it as sunlight clear, and sunlight is a motif that is repeated throughout the poem. And this could suggest that it's a favourable memory of her home. And it's arguable whether this is an accurate presentation or not. It's kind of that idea that nostalgia taints your memories or makes everything seem a bit more rose tinted. So it could be the idea that she actually doesn't remember her home properly, but she just looks at it through a whimsical view. And the comparison between sunlight and November, the November acts as a pathetic fallacy, because November stereotypically is associated with negativity, with coldness, with wetness, with shorter days, longer evenings, and this could be a reference to the political affairs that were happening in her country, so almost like November taking away the sun. The metaphor used with the bright-filled paperweight suggests that the narrator's views of her home country cannot be changed. They're almost held down by this paperweight. It's very fixed, it's very heavy. And this shows how she is able to remain positive. And this again is about her loyalty to her home country. Perhaps this is also a naivety or a stubbornness about her home country. And the idea is that the paperweight stops those memories from falling away or flying away. So she's really determined to keep a positive memory of her hometown. The country is personified to be sick with tyrants, and this demonstrates the contrast between it being sunlight clear. And she argues that the problem with her country is external, it's caused by external forces, and that alludes to the idea of it being a war-torn country. And it ends with sunlight. That's similar to what we said previously about the idea of the sunlight motif. It demonstrates the eternal hope. So even though in the previous line it's sick with tyrants, there's hope towards the end of the sunlight and that kind of triumph through adversity. So in the second stanza, we see the continuance of the positive lexical field when the narrator is describing her home country, and we get a little bit more detail about her home country as well. White stereotypically connotes innocence, so it links back to this idea of childhood glow, this imagination, this memory that she has, which may be rose-tinted. And she furthers this with the description of the graceful slopes that glow, and this magical tone is ascribed to her memory, so it's the idea that it was beautiful and enchanting, and that's how she remembers it. And the long vowels in the slopes and the glow as well just emphasize the grace, how slowly she has to say it because it's just so overwhelmingly beautiful. And then she refers to time rolls its tanks. So this personification here is a double meaning. So it could either talk about time and how the idea of time erases your memory or makes you think differently about a place, or it could literally be about the war aging the country. And the plosive alliteration of time and tanks creates a sinister tone, which is really in contrast to graceful and glow. And then she talks about the frontiers that rise between us close like waves, and this is similar to tissue because Rumens references the destruction caused by division, and perhaps this is the reason why wars are caused. You might also say this is similar to War Photographer in the fact that she can kind of see why these incidents are happening or why these conflicts happen, and there are ways that we can deal with that. So this is quite a sinister tone continued, with the idea that being closed like waves suggests destruction. You can be completely annihilated by waves. And then she talks about the coloured molecule of her grammar that she's left behind in her own country. And this could be the metaphor for truth or identity, this coloured molecule, so she seeks to find this. And this could link to checking out the history about that idea of wanting to find who you are and reacquaint yourself, I suppose, with your history. The simile, the child's vocabulary are carried here like a hollow doll. It suggests the tension between silence and speaking her truth, and it alludes to the denial of her home language. So the idea that once she moved to a different country, she wasn't allowed to speak her home language anymore, and she felt hollow like a doll. So the doll is suggestive of a loss of identity at the hands of an oppressive government. And again, it ends with sunlight, and this is still showing how hopeful she is or how defiant she is. And then in the third stanza, she starts with, I have no passport, and then there's a caesura after that, which makes this quite a bold statement, because a passport is a marker of identity. Without a passport, you can't travel. It's one of those things that you use to prove who you are. And this is just a reminder of the plight of an emigrant. She talks about her city in a personified way for the rest of this stanza, about how it comes to her when she's probably thinking about something else. It's almost like a friend that keeps coming back, and it could also be that she refuses to relinquish her history rather than her city being afraid to let go of her. It's that kind of symbiotic relationship between her city and herself. It lies down in front of me, docile as paper. I comb its hair and love its shining eyes. So her memory of her hometown is a comfort, and it's almost like a pet or a child, which could also suggest that the narrator is in control of her own memory, which links to the idea of her thinking about the graceful slopes and how white the streets were, the idealised image of her home country. There is an ambiguous use of the collective pronoun they. Is it the people from her home country that she's referring to as they, or is it people from her new country that she's referring to as they? It's really unsure. And then her city takes her dancing through the city of walls. This transition from her city as a child or a pet to a metaphorical lover could suggest a transition from child to adult, and this kind of being her metaphorical lover. It's also quite heroic imagery, and this reveals her dependence on these memories, that they are her saviour, they keep her going. The use of my shadow falls as evidence of sunlight is quite a juxtaposition, because the shadow suggests darkness or absence, but it could be read positively, that it's evidence of her existence. So a shadow, if you're in the shadows, suggests evil, darkness. However, having a shadow, if you think of Peter Pan, is confirmation of your identity. So even though she doesn't have a passport, she has a shadow. So it's almost like you have to have the good with the bad.